Thank you. Well, good afternoon, everybody. I hope you had a nice lunch. We're going to take you on a journey through retail and explain how logistics has now become increasingly important to retail.
So hi everybody, I'm Christina Slater. I'm the Finance and Strategy Director of John Lewis, which is a department store chain based entirely in the UK. I've worked in retail for more than 20 years. I've done just about everything from B&M to logistics and now finance and strategy. And I'm really excited to be here to talk about the future of retail and how we delight customers.
And I'm an architect who fell into logistics by mistake, and I've been involved in the industry now for a number of years. And working both in-house logistics, but also working in third-party. And I've been working in third-party supply chain since 2006, and I'm now part of the team within GXO. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the journey that we've all been on as consumers, but also how that's affected businesses and how that affects supply chain. So if you think about the last 25 years, we all think we've come a long way. If you actually go back 100 years, it's actually interesting that 2024 was 100 years since the first big Macy's department store in New York. And as you move through the last 100 years, you move through the invention of shopping trolleys, the invention of deep sea containers, barcoding coming in the 1970s, physical retail becoming a big thing in the 80s. The first true online transaction actually took place in 1994. There were certain things that were happening then online, but not truly as we know it today. So the first true recognised online transaction that involved buying through a marketplace and paying for it electronically was a guy who sold his friend a Sting CD for $12.48 plus shipping. And that journey has taken us really in the last period since 1994 to today to a world where we're very much online. But on that curve, you start to see different things happening. So it's 30 years ago since the first Pizza Hut home delivery. ASOS didn't really get going until around the year 2000. Social media kicked off big style in around 2007. And then online started to grow big style around 2008 onwards. And our experience of customers in the UK meant that actually we were helping customers move from being traditional retailers into the online space. And omni-channel, the phrase of buying anything from anywhere and having it delivered anywhere, really became a sort of a buzzword around 2013. So effectively, the world that we're talking about here today actually has been around for less than a period of time than most of us probably think. And to give you some idea of scale, from that one CD in 1994, it's now estimated the global retail online market's worth about $4.3 trillion. So it's a massive market and a massive opportunity. What's changed, though, from my perspective, if you go back to pre-2005, 2006, logistics really consisted of warehousing and transport. And therefore, retail supply chains consisted of having the right facilities in the right place to service a store environment. What's changed is as the consumer demands have changed, retailers have found that their distribution centres now become other things. So the distribution centre now is all about not only making things operationally more successful, but it's actually about competitive advantage. So it's how do you actually take product into your distribution centre and then fulfill it to wherever it's going. But then actually what you're also doing to that product, either in terms of personalisation, in terms of how you handle returns, how you release inventory, how you get that inventory to where it needs to be next to maximise the value of that stock. So the linking of distribution activity with retail and manufacturing has almost come together. And distribution centres now have to be much more than just fulfilment locations in terms of capabilities.
So I'm just going to take a couple of minutes to talk about how we view that at John Lewis. So we've seen most of that 100 years. In fact, we've seen all of it. We were established in 1864 as a draper's shop on John Lewis Oxford Street. You can see up in the top corner. Today, we're a multi-category, omni-channel retailer with a 60% online presence, one of the biggest websites in the UK. Very, very long way from a small draper's shop. We're also a slightly unusual business. We're co-owned. We were gifted to our members by our founder in the mid-20th century. And that means we think about how we do business differently. We're not in business to make the most profit. We're in business to make a happier world and to have a sufficient profit to allow us to do that. That means we guard our financial independence, which means we're both deeply risk averse and slightly crazy and will do mad things that other people won't do. And it means we think about the decisions we make over a much longer term. We have no shareholder value that we're beholden to today. We're always thinking about what's the business that we're going to bequeath to our partners of tomorrow. And when we think about how we are developing our business, we always start with the customer. It's the most obvious thing in retail. What's the customer problem we're solving? What's the customer proposition we want to offer? And how do you stay a half a step ahead of your customers? That used to be quite a simple thing. As Tony said, you open a shop, you supply goods into it, people come in and they pay for them over the counter. And the most difficult thing is picking the right product. Maybe easier for the John Lewis buyer who was approached about the iPhone. We went on to be one of, Apple's biggest customer in the UK. Less obvious moments, the one that always amuses me is we brought Crocs to the UK, and I don't think we should be forgiven for that. But I remember at the time a buyer showing it to me and thinking that's not a thing. One of our biggest selling products still 15 years later. But it's not as simple as that now. We now have to think about what's the comprehensive proposition. Customers want us to sell great product, but that's table stakes. How are we going to get it to them? How are we going to explain its sourcing and its provenance? How are we going to get it back from them if they no longer want it? How are we going to recycle it? How are we going to explain how to use it? And how are we going to therefore make that profitable when actually the value in the product hasn't changed and the customer expects a lot to go around it? And for me, when I think about these things, I think there are two big battlegrounds in retail today, and they are data and logistics. How do you get the right data to flow end to end to create a seamless customer experience, and how do you keep it secure and make it relevant? But logistics for me is how you make something profitable. If you can't get the right logistics solution, then actually none of this works, and you will seep money down your value chain end to end. So I think a little bit about Tony's provocation about 100 years, and I guess I look at this as 25 years. John Lewis started its digital journey back in 2000, so the same moment as ASOS, the same moment where the world was starting to read about this crazy Jeff Bezos guy that thought he could make an everything store. And John Lewis, because we're a little bit crazy, we thought maybe we'll make an everything store online. And our online journey has been a classic strategic build. We have acquired, we have partnered, we have done outsourcing, and we've built ourselves. But when I look back on that journey from the early days of can we create a channel to a multi-channel business through omni-channel, which is the word we all use, and how I would contract the world today as a customer-centric world where you can't think about channel anymore. The customer is where we are and you have to show up where they are. The key moments in that journey that have allowed us to become profitable and to grow have all been about the logistics solutions we have built. So whether that was way back in 2006 when we built a fully automated online warehouse and went to single source of stock, gave us next day delivery, it gave us availability, way outstripping our competitors and moved us into the future. When we created Click and Collect, and then the solution that we built with GXO all the way back in 2016, Click Link Logistics, which allows us to get Click and Collect parcels delivered retailer-centric, not on a carrier network in the same way. And then how we've integrated returns into our networks and gone on to commercialise our Click and Collect, even more automation and robots. And now in 2025, we're now thinking about our stock as omni. So how do we access our stock wherever it is and sell it to whoever wants it? So that's about digital purchasing in shops. That's about supplying stock to online sales. And how do you connect that up in a logistics world? Because as we know, every time we touch it, we spend money. And so when I look ahead as a retailer, what are the key things that I think we need to think about in the next phase of that digital journey and indeed that customer-centric journey? I think there are four big questions that really hit the logistics world that retailers are grappling with. The first is rapid. For me, when I first started talking about rapid, this was a Crocs moment. Why on earth are people going to order stuff and get it biked to them in 30 seconds? 45% of UK adults bought something on Rapid this year. And we expect 50% of the rapid market to be general merchandise retail by 2030. Yet, only about 22% of companies have a plan to make their offer rapid. This is an obvious play for us, partner with one of the big companies that have built this world, but it's an interesting question for logistics providers. How big a part of the market is this going to get? And what is the solution, and how much of the value chain are you going to let go somewhere else? And then circular selling, I think we've been talking about this for 15 years, but it's now over half of UK adults that purchase secondhand every year. It's the fastest part of growing of the women's wear market. And this, for all of us who dipped our toe in the water with anyone, is all about the logistics solution. because as yet, nobody's really making money at scale. Vinted's last set of results are really interesting. They now have more than 100 million customers. But the person who cracks this at scale, I think, has a bigger future. This market is only going to grow. It will become the largest part of the market. And for retailers, are you going to capture that future value in the brand name that you've built and in the products you have created, or are you going to allow someone else to capture that value? But how you create a logistics solution to do that will be the defining part of whether you can make money from it or not. Packaging I pick out because I think this is retail's dirty little secret. And more than that, I think governments around the world have cottoned on to it being retail's dirty little secret, and they're cash strapped and they're looking for things to tax. This is only going to get more expensive, and we're going to have to clean up our act. And it's hard. We know in an end-to-end supply chain, take the packaging off and the product suffers. And then finally, returns. It's not new. You know, back in 2016, when we partnered with Clipper, now GXO, to create our return solution, we understood that rapid returns in a digital world were important. The biggest supplier to John Lewis week in, week out is returns. But in truth, that's only getting bigger. The cost footprint of it is only getting harder. And that ability to keep your stock moving as capital gets more expensive is really critical. So for us, we have to go again on returns and find a way to speed it up and take cost out. With that, I'll hand back to Tony to talk about how logistics firms can help.
Thank you. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what we've done in partnership with John Lewis to tackle some of that. And I'm going to then talk about some other customers that we work with to try and bring some of those things that Christina talked about to life. So click and collect, which is obviously one of the things that Christina talked about. Click and collect grew out for us as a business from the fact that the market in the UK in particular was being looked after by parcel carriers. And parcel carriers were basically delivering to retail stores images being ordered online for to be picked up by a shop purchaser in a physical store environment. Now, the problem with the carrier market delivering into it is they obviously have to homogenize everything to make it suit the carrier market. What we looked at was how could we create a network that would actually give a retailer what a retailer needed. What would a John Lewis customer actually want, as opposed to the way it may well be delivered in a standardized model to a carrier network. So we deliver what's called a retail solution. So we aggregate together volume from multiple customers, multiple retailers where we do their fulfillment, and in some cases where we don't do their fulfillment, we actually just do their transport to stores. And we put it through sortation systems and we deliver it retail ready. So it's presented into a store, already on a system, all ready for the sales assistants in the store to be able to receive that inventory as a single scan, receiving multiple parcels in one go, and therefore improve the experience. Now, the reason why that's significant is because it's now a massive proportion of the UK market, and obviously is growing across every territory in the world. But it's predicted to be circa 19% of all retail sales in the next couple of years. So actually having a good click and collect solution is no longer just a good idea, it's a vital component for a retailer. Now, at the same time, the high street footfall's dying, or is perceived to be dying. Click and collect is offsetting some of that. So click and collect in itself is a true footfall driver. It gives a reason for a customer to go into a store and actually within that store be immersed within the brand. You don't get that if you're just buying through a screen. And how does that actually work? Well, this complex slide is attempting to give you some idea how it works. Fundamentally, what GXO do is sit in the middle between multiple retailers and their online customers, aggregate all that volume, put that volume into a transportation model that allows us to get it to each store efficiently. And the general model is ordered today, delivered tomorrow, 7 days a week. So in most cases, whatever the cutoff is tonight online, it's physically in the hands of a customer by lunchtime tomorrow, 7 days a week, but in a store environment. Now, the clever bit about that is it then cuts over into one of the things that Christine was saying about packaging. One of the bits that's interesting for us at the minute, we know we'll deliver through this network about 30 million parcels-ish this year. And we look after people like Primark and H&M and John Lewis and a long list of retailers. There's about 45 retailers who share the network. But the question that we're now pushing back to them is, if you're delivering an order to a customer in a store for them to pick up in front of a sales assistant, why are you creating a barrier between the customer and the product they're buying in the form of outer packaging? Why is transit packaging actually needed? Because if you were clever, and could deliver the product to a store customer ready, and the customer's ordered 2 or 3 sizes or 2 or 3 colorways because they're not quite sure about choice yet, handled correctly, the sales assistant could encourage you to actually be an in-store purchaser at that point of collection and physically try something on and help you with size, help you with fit, help you with things that may well go with that product that you'd not even considered, and actually do an added value sale in the store. But more importantly, release the inventory that you don't need. So if you don't need the inventory at that point because it's not something you want to keep, we can then bring it back to the network because our network is integrated both on the outbound and on reverse. So anything that's in a store today that's been returned is returned back to the network today. Everything that hits our return centres is processed on a 24-hour SLA. We know that we're about a week faster than the general market in terms of releasing inventory, and that's borne out by our experiences with John Lewis. Now, what that then allows us to do is within the physical distribution centre, make sure we've got the added value services that may well then be required to bring that back to life. Now, that might be retailering, it might be rebuttoning, it might be spot dry cleaning, it might be steaming, it might be doing repairs to shoes, it might be doing something to tech, because we don't just do this in the fashion space. So by embedding that capability within the physical distribution centre, it becomes that remanufacturing facility that I talked about earlier on. And all of that is fully integrated, and all of that operates 7 days a week. Once an item is returned to us, we have to do several things. Physically, when we receive it, we have to validate that what we've received is what the customer wanted to return. Are you returning what you say you're really returning? We then have to inspect it. We then have to try and recover value from it because we're trying to avoid at all cost anything going to landfill. And obviously, increasing legislation is going to push it even more that way. But then work around, if it's no longer grade A and not fit for grade A sale, what's the best disposition route for it? Is it the retailer having their own eBay store? Is it other channels that they might want to utilise? What do we do with that inventory that might not be quite perfect? What we've demonstrated by embedding capabilities in our DCs is we can bring most inventory back to life. And here's a video that shows you one of our sites. So this effectively is one of our sites in Poland. This is a shared use return centre. So into that returns facility, as it says there, anything up to 35% of what goes out could come back. And what we're doing is, at great pace, bringing that inventory back to life, as if we almost were the original manufacturer. Now that applies to anything, whether it's receiving a dress, taking a stain off it, sewing buttons back on, fixing sequins, removing smells through ozone machines, cleaning training shoes, whatever is necessary, because this is inventory at full value, and we want to make it back to inventory at full value, but at pace. The key to returns is speed. Because in the retail world, as we all know, fashions come and go very, very quickly. And if you are letting inventory stay at a customer's house for a period while they're trying it on, and then eventually it comes back, and then you take a long time to process it, when you finally release the inventory, you probably miss a season. So you're then into markdown. The principle of the way we operate is to think like a retailer of how do we best drive the value of that item and make it the biggest opportunity to resell it. Another thing that's becoming a big opportunity for the world in which we all operate, and as Christina highlighted, is resale. The growth of organisations like Vinted and eBay and Depop and others is driving the resale market, and actually it's quite evident that it's becoming an increasingly big market. If you look at there's an organisation called ThreadUp who every year do a survey, and they've been monitoring over the past few years where resale's going. At the minute, it's growing nearly 3 times faster than the general market. It's forecasted to reach $367 billion of sales by 2029. And in overall terms, accounts for about 9 to 10% of the global fashion market. Now, what that means in my simple commercial head is if you're a brand and you're saying that actually 10% of your stock is now pre-loved stock and you've not got a solution for it, you're almost saying you're happy to address 90% of the market you previously had. Because someone's selling your product via another platform, but in your name, and you're not necessarily getting the value for it. What you're seeing is your brand being owned by others, and you spent a long time developing your brand and your retail entity. So actually, there's a big opportunity in how does a retailer or how does a brand maximize the value of pre-loved without necessarily tying themselves in knots in terms of complexity. So I'm going to take you through a case study, and this case study is a fascinating brand. Paul & Perrette, who are a Swedish children's wear brand, which, if you look on LinkedIn, the pop children's wear, they've been around since the early 70s, and they've always been sustainable. Their belief has always been that they make well-produced children's clothing that last. And if you look on the right-hand side there, their clothing has within it a label that allows you to put 3 children's names. And that's always been part of the policy. It was so well made, it will last 3 children. Now, what they realised as we went into lockdown was all of a sudden people started to sell their product through eBay. Because people who would historically have had a child that's grown up an item of clothing would have moved it on to somebody they knew in their friendship group or someone locally. Well, you can't go out in lockdown. So all of a sudden they start to sell through eBay because actually it was a way to do something and also move inventory out of the house. What Pop did was realise actually their customers were seeing value in pre-loved product and their customers were seeing value in the sustainability related to it. So what they asked us to do, we've run their logistics in the UK for many years, stores and e-com and returns. And they asked us to think about how could they develop a pre-loved solution. And what we did was look at how do you get inventory back, what could you do with it, and how do you feed it back out again, and where's the value in doing it. And we teamed up with an app provider, a company called Turn Eco. And Turn Eco produce a white label app that Pop were able to integrate with. And it allows you to go onto the app and say that you've got items of clothing you'd like to return, the pre-loved items, your child's now grown out of them. The app will give you a value for that item. There's nothing that you then have to do. It gives you an automatic label. The label gets put onto the item and it gets returned. The difference when we receive it is we process it. If it's a new item, we process it to release the value back to your credit card. If it's a pre-loved item, we process it and release your credit back to your Pop account. That Pop transaction then means that you're able to buy more Pop product because your children are growing and getting older using your Pop account and the credits you've created. Several things came out of this. One was the fact that they wanted to make sure that a pre-loved customer didn't feel second-hand. So actually the way that works is as inventory is returned, we put it through processes to almost remanufacture it. So the price that you'll get as a credit is obviously different to the price it's resold at, because it's brought back to life. So it might go through some of the technology I talked about earlier, an ozone machine, it might be repressed, it might be brought back to life in some particular way. If it's an expensive item, it might even have a new zip put into it if the zip's broken. But what we're then able to do is we create an item, so that particular item at the point we processed it is now a one-off item. It might still be in the current range, but it's a one-off. It's the one that Christina sent back because her child didn't need it anymore. So we photograph it, and it's literally a simple photograph. That we give it a new barcode identity, and that's fed back into the buying and merchandising team for them to relist on the website. Now, the reason why it's done that way is they can control when they release certain ranges, because there's little point pushing outerwear into the range in the summer. Outerwear obviously sells better in the winter. But what they're doing is controlling how they release inventory, just like a normal merchandising process. But what they've also found is that the system can then prompt you to buy additional items. One of their concerns when they launched the initiative was that somebody who was going on to buy a brand new pair of jeans for, say, a 3-year-old boy might not buy the new one and might buy the pre-loved one. What they found is the person buying new tends to buy both, because they buy one for new and one for playing in the garden. The person who's an aspirational shopper trades into it and then moves up, because it comes to the core website, it's processed exactly the same. That person who's an aspirational shopper then starts to buy in sale, and then as the year progresses, starts to buy full margin. The success of it is that roughly 95% of everything that comes back, we can make grade A perfect again, because it's children's clothes and not yet teenagers who can wreck clothes. These are relatively young children. But more importantly, they've seen a 35% increase in their customer base, and they're trading 10 times greater than their original forecast. The whole concept of what they're doing is flying. The success of it now is they need now even opening up pop-up pre-love stores, because pre-love now is driving their business very, very powerfully. So the harnessing of an idea and then finding a logistics solution to fit with that is what this is about. Just as Christina said, it's all right having a good idea, you've got to know how to bring it to life. But from a GXO perspective, just moving on slightly, we've got to consider that the world that we live now is very tech-enabled, as per the thing I've got around at the minute. Everything's got tech in it. Customers that we deal with now, even a golf business that we deal with, now has electronic rangefinders. Everything has tech. And if it's got tech, it's got to be processed in a particular way. Because e-waste, in particular, electronic waste, is a massive, massive issue for the planet. Most of it's undocumented. Most of it ends up in landfill. It's a big challenge. So that same principle of embedding technical capability in our distribution centres means that when tech comes back, we can process it in the same way. So again, looking at what we do for John Lewis in that space, we have full TV repair lines within our return to distribution centre. We can repair LG and Samsung and any product that comes back through the door. We have the ability to data cleanse product that comes in, laptops and phones. We even have to data cleanse now coffee machines, because if you can program it and put in what you want for your coffee, it's got data on it, we have to cleanse it. So the ability to deal with things centrally at the point you touch them, as opposed to them being done by somebody else, goes back to that piece about remanufacture. Logistics has moved a long way from just being about trucks and sheds. Logistics is now absolutely about how do you enable the businesses you work with to grow. And that's around thinking more like them and less like a logistics business. So to round that off and give us a bit of time for Q&A if anyone's got any questions, is that the reality is retail will keep evolving. Retail is going to change. It's changed dramatically in the last 25 years. It's changed substantially in the last 100. The next 25 years are going to be mind-boggling. And as AI starts to become more mainstream, as manufacturing may well change because of global challenges, how things might come closer back to home, and all of that starts to evolve, the requirements of businesses like ours will change. It's no longer about how big does your warehouse need to be and how big does your transport fleet need to be. It's now about what type of services are you thinking of, what type of solutions might you need, how do we bend and shape ourselves to give you that, and how do we keep innovating? Part of my role is helping customers see that they're not necessarily on their own in the way they think. There's a common thread running through a lot of businesses about the need for change and the need to do things to satisfy the demands of customers. But as was said in one of the talks this morning, the key requirement is to do it at pace. Agility and the ability to turn on a sixpence and change the way you operate, as per the example recent, I suppose, with Donald Trump in America, where suddenly the rug can be pulled from under you. How do you react to that? And part of the role that we have within GXO is to be the partner to help you with that by pivoting quickly and giving you new ideas. So the world will keep changing. It's not about trucks and sheds, but it's about partnership, and that's what we're about.
Thank you so much for that. And we have some time for Q&A. So if you need to think about a question, then you can do so. If you do have a question, feel free to raise your hand and then we'll come and find you with a really cool mic. No spoilers. If you could then state your name and your company, then we know from whom the question is. But while they get thinking, if I'm a new kid on the block, I want to go into pre-loved, I want to go into repairs, where do I start?
It depends what you're about, really. So if you're a business that is relatively small and has got a good idea, there is actually a home for you within GXO. GXO have a business unit that isn't massively advertised because of the way it evolves, called GXO Direct. And GXO Direct was created specifically to do what you're talking about. So in that space, we have a lot of shared use facilities and shared resource facilities. And the idea is if you're a small but growing business and you're now at a point where you've exhausted your own ability to do things and you need help, we will dovetail you into a site with other businesses. So that gives you the ability to share the overhead, share the resources, but give you, capability that you can only dream of, really, because you're paying for elements of a solution, not all of the solution, because other people are sharing something similar. Now, it is yours, So actually, you don't have to worry that suddenly we're making everything homogenized and everything's basic. You get what suits you, but you're sharing the resources and the overhead, and you're sharing the IT that drives it. So that allows you to grow. And one of the sort of phrases that I try to help people think about, how does that work? It's like a pay-as-you-grow model. You know, as you need more capability, the system gives you more capability, and we support you. But what it's not about doing is saying, well, you've got a great idea, but it's only going to work if it looks like this. You know, we're not about forcing you into a way of working. We're about helping you develop, but giving you some skills to support you. So actually, the way to do it is to approach businesses like us and anybody else who's available can do this type of thing, where you see they've got the skill set. You just shouldn't feel too concerned about a big organization overpowering you, because that's not how we're set up.
And Christina, you of course have a lot of learnings along the way. What would you give me as a thought or as a lesson learned if I were to start that journey into Pre-Loved?
So I think we have always started with our consumer, and it's very easy as the market develops to get, you get ideas from other people, and, Pre-Loved has been done. But what is the customer you're aiming for? What's the specific need? What's your unique right to win with those customers, and designing to create the value for the customer. If you create the value for the customer, you'll create value for yourself. And really thinking through, you have a set of choices. As I said, whenever you develop your business, you can build it yourself, you can buy it in, you can partner, create joint ventures like we did with ClickLink, and really thinking about what your route to value is. Most of these things are going to cost you in the first 12, 18, 24 months. So how are you going to get fast to a route where you can create that value for a consumer and therefore for yourself?
Thank you. So I'm looking in the audience. This is the QR code. If you're too shy to take the mic, you can also just type in a question if you like by using this QR code with the code. Very complicated, but you'll manage. And you mentioned customers and kind of creating that dialogue with a customer. And you mentioned logistics as a really big, building block for the next coming years, Christina. So how has logistics enabled you to create that brand value to customers in the past couple, 25 years?
25 years. So I think, the interesting thing about the development of digital is we've all gone on a journey with customers where they didn't know what they wanted. When we first did Click and Collect in 2008, I remember even within the business. So what you're saying is they're going to buy it online and then they're going to come to a shop to get it. Why? Why would anyone do that? So you've got to really think through, but you've got to stay a step ahead. The data isn't out there. I think we've become a very data obsessed world, but in terms of creating value for consumers, asking them doesn't really help. There's a wonderful stat that says 96% of consumers would pay more for sustainable packaging. But if you really look below it, a similar number says it's the retailer's problem. So they don't really mean they'll pay more. They just mean they don't want to say no to that question. So I think it's really looking behind what's actually happening for the consumer and asking yourself, what's the need this product or proposition is going to fulfill for them? And then for me, the logistics is about saying what customers want is ease. They won't go out of their way. They won't pay more for packaging. They won't cross the street if they don't have to get your stuff. You can't make them work hard. And so you've got to design a logistics solution that makes it really simple. The description of the POP secondhand website, somebody said you have to do these 52 steps to create value from your secondhand goods. You're going to give them to your next door neighbour. If somebody says, scan this, pop that, stick it in a bag, most people will go, yeah, I'll have 20 quid, 20 euros back for doing that. So to me, the logistics solution has got to be, how do you make it really simple for the consumer? And then ultimately, the lesson I've learned in logistics over the years from people like Tony is touch it once. Do whatever you're going to do once and move it from there. Every time you touch your stock or you move your stock, it becomes inaccurate, you damage it, and it costs you.
Yeah. And I think linked into that, one of the things that POP happily will say, because they're regularly speaking at events like this now, is that their philosophy now is, can they manufacture it once but sell it twice? Because actually they can. And therefore the product does have life beyond one person, because they prove that. Their manufacturing standards are 3 children. And if you don't have 3 children, and you don't know 3 children, what do you do with the unused bits? Well, then what you're doing is you letting your brand then be sold out through Vinted and elsewhere. Well, why not own it? And as long as you make the maths work, which they've done commercially, actually you can own that relationship and the customer stays loyal to you. And you're guaranteeing the value of the brand. What you're doing is not letting the risk that a product is being sold that may well not be their product, but just says it is. Counterfeit online is still a big issue. And therefore controlling your inventory and controlling your brand as the world evolves is no longer just a good idea. It's actually becoming quite something you can actually get after.
I'm curious. So if we look at Team Yellow, who has bought a pre-loved item or who is thinking about it, let's say in the next 6 months, to actually go out and look into pre-loved? Just really curious. Show of hands. That's quite some people.
Yeah.
So it is also the numbers from ThreadUp, the ThreadUp report, of course, show that it's growing and there's interest to explore that market. So what would you say are like the biggest opportunities if we look at pre-loved and repair for like the next couple years?
Fastest growing market's women's wear. And women's wear is one of the biggest singular markets. I think what I would say is everybody will pile into that, I suspect. Secondhand electronics has actually quietly gotten quite big already. And reconditioning stock. What's interesting is the big brands haven't been particularly interested in getting into that. I'm curious as to whether they will themselves. It takes specialist partners to do it. We recondition TVs all the time, but it's not simple, and there's a cost of entry into that. I think children's wear is interesting because most children's clothes, because there is a base level of standard, particularly in Europe, that you have to manufacture to for safety, most children's clothes for children under 9 will outlast the child. Certainly over 10 they get more destructive and it gets more interesting. But I suspect in a value-driven market, that probably is going to grow the fastest now. And people like Pop have led the way there in terms of owning that equity for themselves.
What's also interesting, you talk about tech, is another organisation we look after. We look after the Sky Glass product across the UK and Europe. And Sky Glass basically is Sky moving away from using a dish to effectively coming through broadband, and it's just digital TV. And we look after their changing of inventory. So effectively it's basically a rental model. You rent the TV with the package that you get. And if you decide you want a bigger TV, you can trade up or trade down. And we handle all the logistics for that and the remanufacturing of it in the middle of that experience. It's gone from a good idea to Sky Glass now being the biggest selling TV within Europe. Because actually what they're doing is giving you, so they've broken the market in a way. They've said, we were a satellite dish business, but actually the market's changing. How do we best capture that? If we produce our own technology, and that technology then becomes a rentalized item, we can also control that piece as well. So they've just changed the rules. And have done it very, very successfully, but still need then someone to facilitate that. And pleasingly, we're slotted in the middle of that because of the skills that Christina's talked about. So I think the reality is that whatever business model anybody thinks they've got, it's going to change. And what you've got to be quite good at is how do you do that? So going back to your question about being a smaller business that starts and growing, one of our recent experiences with customers, big and small, is that sharing resources are becoming quite the norm now. If you go back 15 years, people would want a distribution centre with their name on the side of it. They want the trucks with their name on the side of it because that's what people did. The problem with that is it becomes, if you're not careful, quite a financial burden because actually you're always paying for it whether you're utilising it or not. If you design it well, it'll fit what you want to do with it, but you might have a 5-year horizon. So initially it might be too big, and then it'll be perfect, then it'll be too small. So actually you're always suboptimal if you're not careful. The beauty of a shared use facility is that actually you have everything being elastic. So you never hit that ceiling. And that ability to turn quickly and change ideas quickly means that actually even bigger businesses we're dealing with now are looking to us for shared use facilities because actually it gives you the ability to change. You're not tied into a single way of operating.
And I see that David had a question. And David, I think your question got cut off. So I think maybe the tech didn't allow you enough signs. Do you dare to ask a question in person, David? Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, are you ready? So I did this like athletics once in school, but it's been a while. So are you ready to catch this thing? You might have to come a little bit forward because...
Bounce it back.
I'll pounce it back.
Yeah.
Or we'll just
pass
it down. So if I throw it to the first row, because I think I can manage that. If you could pass it all the way back to David,
Go.
Awesome. This is working. I didn't want to kill anybody of you, so that's why I refrained from throwing too far.
Someone short-circuited our game then.
Yeah, exactly.
Perfect.
I assume I just talk into here.
Yeah, perfect.
Great. Hey, David Locke, I work for Amazon. Just firstly, thank you for the talk. Interested just to get your thoughts on ESPR, the emerging regulation, where we need to start publicly reporting our waste. There's certain disposal bans. What's your thoughts on how that's going to change mental models in supply chain and then returns and disposals in the future?
I think it's going to do a couple of things, really. I mean, I can speak from my perspective, and then Christina can tell you what she thinks from a retail perspective. But I think it's going to start to question what you do with a product and at what point you keep adding value into it. So we've got one particular retailer that shall remain nameless, where we used to work with them on the basis that if an item had a cost price of sub £20 and it came back as a return, it probably wasn't really worth any investment into that item, because actually they wouldn't actually get the benefit of it, and therefore it would be jobbed off or sold to a secondary channel. Over time, we got that £20 down to £7 by embedding capability in the DC, as I've talked about. With that particular customer now, we're down as low as 50 pence. We will spend money on a very cheap item, providing it stops it going to landfill, because their obsession now is they want to be able to report they're not sending things to landfill. So what we've had to do is create different ways of handling product for different people. So in a lot of cases, we now will re-engineer it within the distribution centre, like we talked about with tech or with fashion, to try and find a market for it. If all of that ultimately fails, we'll recover components. And we're now even looking at fashion about recovering fibres and thread. So it's opening up opportunities for us to look at what can we do with product to deal with the legislation that's coming, because it is coming. 2026 is full of legislation coming our way. But it is starting to question around packaging. And if you're delivering through a click and collect route, why are you doing packaging at all? Transit packaging, clearly it's got consumer packaging. But why are you doing things in particular ways? Because that suited your supply chain. Well, actually, if you change the way your supply chain operate, you might be able to find an opportunity to take it out. So it's making us look at all sorts of ways of working in a different way.
Yeah, I mean, I would say something similar. I think governments shine lights on things and then they get interested in regulating them, taxing them, making them more expensive. I think it's the way the industry is heading, because it's the right thing to do. I think it's what consumers want, but as I said, I don't think it's what consumers want to pay for. So I think you've got to get ahead of the game and start thinking about how you create value for yourself, and start with that as the mission rather than wait for a tax or a regulatory compliance to land on your doorstep. I think what it is doing, we've seen in certain parts of the market, in certain sectors, brands designing products almost deliberately to make you buy a new one in 3 years. I think we're starting to see that move away, right to repair, those kind of things. I think we'll only see more and more and more of that, and therefore deciding what products you're going to sell and what markets you're going to be in, and thinking about them being sustainable and for the long term, and products that will last and have a future value, I think is the only way to think about the future. How long it takes to get there and how expensive that is a different question.
Thank you both so much for sharing your stories on reinventing retail, and especially how to enter the pre-loved and repair market. Thank you, audience, for joining us this 45 minutes. And if you have questions or if you're curious to learn more, I think they will stick around somewhere here, or they have also a stand out front, so you can catch them there if you have any questions.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.